It's the West Tigers podcast and Eddie Otto. We're up to episode number 90. We're also just one game off to complete full seasons of West Tigers rugby league that we've covered. It's gone unbelievably quickly.
It's been a strange old season, Joel. It seems like an age ago. You say it's gone quick, but, you know, we were shut down for about 8 or 10 weeks, weren't we, after those first two games? It's been a season I don't think we'll ever see again. Maybe we will next year. Who knows?
Yeah, let's hope we never see it again. Certainly been a fractured year. That's the way that I look at it. The funny thing is, I did say earlier in the year is that the off season seemed to take forever. And even though it's been an extended year, I can't believe we're only a few days off the off season again for West Tigers fans, and the big long wait continue.
Well, I guess the positive this year is you'll have, just from a fan's perspective of rugby league, you'll have finals in October and you'll have State of Origin in November. So they're those really slow months where there's not much on. You get to Christmas and then all of a sudden they might decide, the NRL, because they missed out of 4 or 6 games of revenue this year, they might decide to start in February next year and play 28 rounds. I wouldn't put it past them.
Yeah. All right, well, what we're going to do is, because this is the last West Tigers podcast before a match for the 2020 season, we won't talk too much about recapping the season, because we're going to come back. We might even get Declan on and sit down and do it as a bit of a roundtable to go back through the year, best games, worst games, best player, all that sort of thing. So that's not too far away. The biggest news since we last spoke, Eddie, is that James Tamou has put pen to paper. We had a pretty good idea what was going to be happening, but 2 seasons, I'm pretty happy with the deal. He's not exactly the player that we need, but he certainly brings a lot to the table, I think. I think it's a plus, especially when you factor in Stefano coming as well. That's a bit more strength up front.
You're right. I think he ticks most of the boxes, Joel. He's not known as an intimidator, James Tamou, but we've mentioned his strengths the past couple of weeks, and that he's durable, he's consistent, and he's a leader. And I think we are short of leaders on the field, Joel. Do you think he'll be, as things stand, if we weren't to make any more signings, would he be a shoo-in for captain next year, or is that overthinking it?
Oh, I think he probably would be. I think he would be right up there in calculations for captain for sure. And I think you don't play as many games as he's played each year. Unbelievably consistent. Touch wood. Yeah, with West Tigers bad luck, but unbelievably consistent. Playing 20 odd games a year, unless you're a real pro and you're doing the training, looking after your body. So I think there's a good chance he'll be our leader.
Well, we've lacked that the past couple of years. I think it's been obvious on the field that we've been sort of pushed around a little bit by the referees, I feel. And James Tamou doesn't look like the most... he looks like he leads by his actions. Like he looks sort of quiet sort of guy. But just having that forward leader, Joel, I think, if I look back over the whole year, I was pretty excited about our pack going to the year, as were you. I think we both thought they were a little bit underrated. But I think they've... hit the wall this back end of the year, and a couple of guys haven't really kicked on. We've seen, I think, Josh Addo-Carr and Lucci have had really good years, but a few other guys, McKaylee hasn't really stepped up to the mark. Luke Garner, for me, hasn't progressed on what he did last year. So whilst I thought this was a pack that, might be a top 8 pack, I don't think that's proved the case this year. We're missing a leader and someone who can consistently get that 140, 150 metres a game, because, Russell Packer certainly hasn't been doing it, has he?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when we did look at the squad and look at the prop rotation at the beginning of the year, certainly we had Zane Musgrove there as a constant. And when I don't think it's a coincidence. When Zane Musgrove injured his foot, West Tigers season derailed. I think we've really missed him. And of course, we've had no value for money from Russell Packer whatsoever this year. No positive at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, the positive would be, Joel, if we found another club. That might sound harsh, but whether it's through, I don't know if it's through a lack of effort or just whether he was, damaged goods. Some of those signings that we made in 2018, they were on the slippery slope towards mediocrity as players, despite what some of them had achieved in the past. So I think James Tamou, 31 is an age some people will go, well, maybe his best football's behind him. and he is playing in a really strong, fit side in Penrith. So I guess that will be the question mark next year, coming to a side that is not always playing on the front foot. Can he produce the same football? So hopefully, I'm confident enough. But like you said, I don't think he's a Gareth Ellis sort of player. But those players are hard to find, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. I mean, yeah. Obviously, for West Tigers, a Jared Warrior-Hargraves or a James Fisher-Harris, someone like them would have been exactly the right player. But I think James certainly brings more positives and negatives. So I think he will make a contribution. And I think we just need a few anchors in the team. We need a few guys that can hold it together. We always seem very fragile, a bit loose and a bit flimsy. And you need those pillars to build this team around.
Well, Joel, a good couple of coaches I had in the past, they sort of said, there shouldn't be a whole lot of difference between players' best and worst games. You want players in your squad that are a 7 or 8 out of 10 every week. And realistically, I mean, how many of those guys do we have? I think you'd say Harry Grant's been at least a 7 or 8 out of 10, every game.
Yep.
David Nofaluma's been pretty close to that, and maybe Josh Addo-Carr. But outside of that, we've got guys that might be an 8 one week and then a 3 the next week. And there's far too much inconsistency in players' games. And I don't know if that's a lack of talent or just mentally they're not quite there. But you'd say James Tamou can be that 7, 8 out of 10 player every week.
Yeah, exactly. I've got an interesting stat for you that I saw on the forum. I hadn't thought about it until this point, but it puts a lot of things in perspective for West Tigers. Next year, providing that Michael Maguire is still here after the Ivan Cleary situation, never speak too soon. But providing that Michael Maguire is here and is West Tigers coach next year, which we obviously expect that to be the case, he'll be the first coach in 8 years to be here for a 3rd season. Every other coach has lasted less than 2 years.
I don't think that's quite accurate, because I'm pretty sure Jason Taylor was here 2015, 2016 and pre-season 2017 was sacked after 2 rounds.
Yeah, 2 years and 2 weeks. Yes. But
2 years and 2 weeks.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's hope that doesn't. I'm sure it won't unravel as quickly for Mad as it did for Jason Taylor in that 3rd season. But yeah, I mean, Mick Potter was 2 years, and Ivan Cleary was roughly 2 years, I suppose.
Yep.
So I don't think the coach is the problem, Joel, but, there's more and more people at the moment, I suppose, saying, well, where has the team improved this year? And does that, should Michael Maguire be bearing a little bit more criticism among Tigers fans for especially the performances in the back half of this year?
Well, actually, just further to that, Eddie, just before we look at some stats on defence, actually, when you think about it, which will make you laugh, after Tim Sheens, Jason Taylor is the 2nd most experienced West Tigers coach.
Yeah, well, as I've got some stats for you, Joel, and experience doesn't always equal wins, unfortunately.
No, it doesn't. West Tigers' defence over the last 2 months, this was quite telling. These are the points that we've conceded over the last 8 games. 50 points against Melbourne, 20 points, 34, 30, 38, 28, 44 and 26. You cannot do anything in this competition if you're conceding that amount of points.
It's hard to shadow over that. That's really disappointing. And I suppose, maybe that's been glossed over a little bit, Joel, by the fact we scraped a couple of high-scoring wins. I think it was 34-32 against Manly, 29-28 against Canterbury.
Yeah.
But that's wooden spoon type defence, Joel. I know Brisbane have been awful this year, but we've got the 14th ranked defence this year, which is a big step backwards, because I had a look at 2018 and 2019, and even though we're in a similar sort of position on the ladder, we're much more stout defensively. 2018, we conceded 19 points a game, which was really good for our standards. And 2019 was at 1 point more than that, 20 points a game, which was about middle of the road. Whereas this year, we're now conceding more than 25 points a game, which is a really unacceptable. And it's quite, I was a bit surprised. I knew the defence hadn't been good, but, we bang on about the lack of strike power in this team. We've actually got the 6th ranked attack in the competition, which surprised me, and the 14th ranked defence. So do you really think we're the 6th best attack in the competition, Joel, or was that just a few sort of blowouts where we managed to beat some of the bad teams really, really well?
Yeah, I think we're a little bit overinflated there. I don't think we've had trouble. And I did make this point on, I think it was on the forum myself, or it might have been on our Facebook page. At least sitting here, having seen the team being able to score points, I always think back to West Tigers 2003. We had Lincoln Withers and a few of those guys. We couldn't score a point to save our lives. I'd much rather be in this situation and say, well, our attack's okay. We can make some more improvements there. I think the defence can be fixed is the point that I'm getting to. I think if you're going to have a problem with defence, and I think a lot of it is attitude, I think there's, as we've mentioned already on the podcast, I feel like this team's been a bit flimsy. It hasn't quite had that resilience. I think that's what we need to work on. And I think that's what the big focus is going to be over the next 6 months.
Yeah, well, it has to be. And I guess 7 wins, 12 losses, it's been, even though we're in 10th place, it's more probably 12th, 13th sort of record, Joel. But I had a look at our record against top 8 teams this year. So far, 1 win and 9 losses. So that sort of, missing over about how the Tigers can beat anyone on their day, but lose the games they're meant to win. I don't think that's very true. And I think that's, we're a long, long way off, not even the first and second and third in the competition, but potentially the Canberras and Parramatta's and Newcastle's. Yeah. Because that's a shocking record against the top 8. And a lot of those games weren't close. I know we hung in there once, I think, with Penrith, and we did get close against South.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show that there's still a lot of work to do, even though we're sort of 9th and 10th. There's a fair gulf in this competition at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, there is. And when you look at a team that is a mid-table team, West Tigers, we'd probably say, if you looked at the roster of the 2020 season, without being biased, you'd probably say somewhere 9, 10, 11. You have to beat the Gold Coast. You have to beat the Warriors and jag a couple of those top 8 teams to make the 8. And that's the difference between the difference between if we were sitting here, we'd beaten the Warriors, beaten the Gold Coast, beaten one, maybe that Canberra game, and one other result had gone our way, we'd be sitting here saying the season's been a success.
I know what you mean, but I think there's every team in the competition could probably say that at some point. If you're a Warriors, you could say if we jagged a couple of wins here, then we'd be here. But I'm always a big believer that at the end of the day, that the ladder doesn't lie. And, you mentioned those games that we could have jagged. We were very lucky to beat Canterbury twice.
Yeah.
Once. We were very lucky to beat Manly, scoring 3 tries in the last 10 minutes. So on the flip side of that, you could be running 14th and look worse. I think we've there's been 2 or 3 games that we could have won that we lost, and the flip side of that. So I think we are where we deserve to be, and there's things to address because that record against the top 8 sides, I think that's a lack of class and stouch in the side, and defensively there's problems. You think maybe taking a couple of those players out at the end of the year might be able to solve some of those things?
It's a multi-dimensioned question. I should just say that we did beat Canterbury twice, which does inflate our record a little bit when you think about it. I think that if I look at the squad, and it is something that we have constantly been on about, we have too many guys that offer the same thing. We have too many guys in the back line that don't offer the strike that we need. And I think that there is a divide, and I think there is I don't want to say the magic culture word, but I think a battle has been going on in the background at West Tigers this year. And I don't know at what level it's been on and how public it's been, but I think there's been an attitude problem. I haven't seen the same nitty, stick-togetherness. I don't see the teamwork. I don't see the cooperation that we've had in other years. It's felt very fractured to me. And I think this last round can't come quick enough. I think there's got to be a bit of a clean out, and I think there's got to be new blood come in.
Fair. I think that's the danger when you go after some recruits like BJ Leilua, Joel, who have, I was excited about BJ, but at the moment I think I've been dead wrong. I think he's been a big, big disappointment. Even halfway through the year, I was still thinking he might be able to turn it around. obviously he's been dropped for the next game. But that's the thing. Once you start bringing in players like BJ, who can be, known for poor discipline, and then you've got on top of that players that were brought in by the previous coach. I don't necessarily think I think it's something was always going to evolve a little bit. Guys have been trying to be sold by the club, or guys off contract, always going to not quite look as together. And you could tell in their performances that they're just sort of waiting for the end of the season, a lot of those guys. Benji knows he's not going to be here next year, so maybe that means he plays a slightly different style of football, which is maybe a little bit more selfish and trying to put himself in the window for next year. And some players might be thinking that. So, yeah, we've got to try and bed down a squad, Joel, that's a little bit younger, a little bit hungrier, and on board with the coach. Because, if we're to go in next season, even with James Tamou, with this sort of squad, I can see them running in the bottom four next year.
We're going to play buy, swap and hold. For the first time ever, I'm going to be asking the questions, Eddie, so we'll do that shortly. But a little bit more signing news around tonight. And it looks like there could be some movement from Josh Addo-Carr, with reports that Jordan Rapana is in the mix. I don't think Jordan Rapana is coming our way, but he could be going to Melbourne, which frees up Josh Addo-Carr to come to the West Tigers. I think last time we were talking about a three-way swap deal, and I think that this could be warming up, and we could have some news soon with any luck.
Yeah, it seems like a holding sort of pattern, isn't it? I mean, Melbourne last time were adamant they needed something in return. That's what strong clubs do. They don't just roll over and give you players for nothing. So even if it doesn't come from us, maybe it'll come from someone else, which would be good. If we don't have to trade anyone, even though there's a couple of players we might like to trade, Melbourne won't be interested in them. So, Jordan Rapana is probably a player that would like to play for Melbourne and would be an adequate replacement for Addo-Carr. And there's been no real sort of, momentum swing, Joel, in the media or on the forums about Addo-Carr looking elsewhere. I think we're fairly confident that he wants to come here, and it's maybe 60, 70% done, a bit like the Harry Grant thing. And we're just waiting for the right pieces to move in the puzzle.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's going to be rugby league's worst kept secret that he's coming here. We just need to make sure that deal can be done to placate Melbourne. And it's fair enough. They do have a contract with him, and they're playing hardball. It is interesting, and a few guys and people on the forum have made a really good point that if it was West Tigers that were holding a player back from joining his family, especially the circumstances that Josh Addo-Carr has been in with some of the things going on in his family, the Telegraph and Fox Sports will be calling us out for player welfare and this and that, and it's more than just business. But Melbourne seem to get away with it, no problems. They're just professional.
Yeah, well, that is the difference, Joel. One, when you play in an AFL town and no one really cares because you don't sell any papers, and two, when you're winning. Yeah. And Melbourne have won for 10 years and we haven't won, so papers go looking for all sorts of ways to bring the club down. So we just got to win more games.
Yeah, we do. Speaking of the Storm, let's quickly go back to that game. I posted on the Facebook page after the game. It was obvious there were two teams in very different places. It was a real mismatch of class and speed and strength. But what I thought was also funny, Eddie, we spoke last week about Melbourne being the yin to the West Tigers yang. They're disciplined and controlled, and we're not to a large degree. But I thought at times in that game, when we dragged them down to our level, they started getting scrappy and frustrated. It's always a funny battle between the Tigers and the Storm.
Yeah, it's sort of one of those end-of-season games, Joel, where both teams get out there after 10 and 15 minutes and there's a little bit more space and time than there usually is sort of on an NRL field. And that's because one team's playing for pride only and the other team's, far superior, but probably not as amped up as they would be for a finals game or a team against a top four side. So it was a very open game. We conceded some really soft tries, some good tries from Melbourne, but, there were some guys out there, Joel, that probably didn't quite give their all. I thought BJ obviously was very disappointing. I thought Josh Reynolds was bitterly disappointing, in what was an opportunity for him to maybe push a claim here for next year as a starting half. 5 missed tackles, and I think only a few runs. So, yeah, it was a game. I was out at the time. It was on the TV, but it was sort of hard to stay interested. The amount of times I looked up in Melbourne, we were standing behind the post every time I looked up.
Yeah, there was some really interesting, really disappointing performances. I thought that we that was an early blow losing Sam McIntyre. When you're playing a really good team, you can't have anything go against you, and to lose Sam so early in the game to that concussion, I thought that was a big blow. Obviously, the Josh Addo-Carr injury. Thank goodness it doesn't look like it's as bad as first thought. It didn't help that the game was lost at that stage. Zane Musgrove, as we said earlier, he was back and he was our best player. I think he was very, very good for the Tigers, made plenty of metres and hit hard in defence. I think AJ Kapoa, he has some brilliant touches. He seems to have it. I don't think he's a winger. I just don't think he's... I see him in the centres in the not too distant future, but he's got it, but just his hands let him down at times.
It reminds me a little bit of Kevin Nguama. He's quite quick and he's got sort of potential there with the ball, but it's just a little bit raw and makes some mistakes. So I think he's a player that could do with a full pre-season at the club, obviously joining mid-season. But yeah, and just on our squad, Joel, it was an interesting article about the Tamou signing. I don't know if you saw it. It was on Fox Sports, and a guy, he was sort of panning the Tigers about signing James Tamou, saying for the last 3 years, we've had the most experienced squad in the NRL. I think we had over 2,200 caps in 2018 of experience in that top 30 squad, 2,500 in 2019 and 2,300 this year. And our squad is 2.5 years older than the average premiership team. And about the sweet spot they're saying is around 1,800 to 1,900 caps. So it was actually interesting to see an article that just didn't pan, or it was actually went in depth with some stats and breakdown of teams that have been successful in the past. So we've got to get, I think, that squad cap rate down, and that'll help once we get a few of the veterans who are going to either retire this week or
well,
maybe.
The bigger story with that is that it's flawed. It's actually flawed data, because most of the senior guys that we've got haven't contributed. Okay, so if you've got guys that have played 200 games and they're playing every week, but they're not playing every week. Our roster is flawed by having a few guys there that aren't playing, that are at the end of their career. When you look at the actual games played of the guys that we've been picking and who've played the most games this year, it's actually a lot younger than.
Yeah, that's 100% fair, but they still are being paid money, Joel, those guys not to play. So I think maybe that's the guy in the article's point, is that we are got all these guys who are experienced, but we've signed them at the wrong time of their career, when perhaps their best football is not in front of them. Although last year we made some, and with Harry Grant and Dewey and them, it looks like a bit of a change of tact recruitment-wise. Hasn't all paid off, but wait and see if there's anything more than Tamou and Addo-Carr next year. I'd be surprised if there's any more journeymen though.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you need to have a mix. You need to have a mix of guys with different abilities and different speed and different strike, different height, all that sort of stuff. I think that variety is the spice of life when it comes to a team, and you've got to have a good balance between having the youngsters, having the guys that are 24 to 28, and a few old heads as well, and having the right guys. It's like the analogy of having the right people in the right seats on the bus, and we haven't had that. You can see that. The proof of the pudding is in the eating.
No, you're right, and it's it's something that I'm sure Madge deep down is boiling over about, that he hasn't really been able to get his hands on this roster as much as he'd like. Although, again, on the flip side of that, on the forum, I saw that I think 22 of the top 25 players have either been re-signed or signed by Madge. So he has had a role in, bringing Robert Jennings and re-signing Luke Brooks and things like that. So I'm not absolving him of responsibility here, but it is an unbalanced squad, like we said.
Yeah, and to be fair to Madge, the guys that he has signed, that maybe aren't quite winners. The guys that are obviously been targeted, the Robert Jennings of the world, he signed them for 2 years. Luke Brooks, yes, was a longer contract, but everybody else it's been a shorter contract, which I think they've been bridging contracts just to get us to that next player by some time. So you can't castigate him too much over that. Should we do buy, swap, and hold?
Fire away, John.
All right. Tristan Saylor is going to be without a club after this week. Should the West Tigers sign Tristan Saylor?
I'm on the fence because I just haven't seen enough of him, Joel. I know he came through as like a winger, and then he's been playing more in the halves off the bench. So, again, one of those sort of utility players. Looks a skillful sort of player, but unable to break into that Dragon side. I'd think he'd have to be almost like a minimum wage deal if we did, like a 1 or 2 year, because he hasn't established much in the NRL.
Yep. Okay. All right. I'll ask you a harder one here. Joey Leilua is the worst big name signing in the NRL in the last 5 years.
Last 5 years, I can think of 2 off the top of my head that are just even worse, and that's Kieran Foran and Josh Reynolds. So, no, he's not the worst signing in the last 5 years, and he's been a bit of a dud this year, but he's still got 2 years to turn it around. Losing a little bit of faith, but no, he's not the worst signing in the last 5 years.
Having watched Joey this year, I can assure you, Eddie, turning around is not his strong point.
Yeah, well, that's disappointing, isn't it? Because, like, you'd think, especially with his brother here, Joel, and his brother set such a good example in terms of turning himself into an 80-minute forward and getting himself fit. But older brother Joey doesn't seem like he wants to do that.
No, exactly. No, well, they say that the Tigers should be heavyweights. Well, we've had a history of heavyweights. Obviously, Joey comes to mind. Yeah, Tui lower heel comes to mind. Owen Craigie.
Yeah.
All right. 2 more for buy, swap, and hold. Bryce Cartwright is without a club, desperately wanting a club to give him an opportunity in Sydney. Buy, swap, or hold?
No, not at all, Joel. That's not. He just hasn't fired a shot in 3 years. I just don't know if his heart's in it. I think he's gone.
Okay. What a shame, because he had all the talent in the world, didn't he?
Yeah.
Right. And the hardest question for buy, swap, and hold. Madge should have been less democratic and less patient in 2019. He should have got in and ripped in more with this squad.
Are you talking in terms of selections or just in terms of media appearances or everything?
I'm talking about selections and roster management.
No, I saw that. I think he's been true to himself, but he also is mindful that, kicking chairs around every week and changing players every week, it has a sell-by date, that sort of thing. I think it's more than a shock tactic, but I just think you've got guys there next year that he probably doesn't want, but are going to be there. So he's had to find a bit of a balance. I think he's done his best. I think he's made a lot more changes than most other NRL clubs. We whinged for years about Tim Sheens and Jason Taylor picking the same players despite losing, being outside the 8, whereas Madge has been criticised, if anything, for making too many changes. So I think he's tried to wield the axe. I think he's tried to be hard. But then maybe the back end of the year, he's realised, look, I'm going to be stuck with some of these guys next year. I need to keep them on side. So I think he's sort of found that balance there okay. You think so or not?
I think in hindsight, he could have made a few tougher decisions quickly. I think we've got to the end of 2 years, and I think we're about where we should have been after a year.
Okay, well, but what do you mean by that? Give us an example of a tougher decision. I mean, are you talking about like telling Russell Packer to stay home and never picking him, and Josh Reynolds, or just?
Yeah, well, maybe yeah. Tapping those guys on the shoulder and saying, you are better off looking for a deal in the Super League because you're not going to get game time. We're going to go in a different direction here. But mostly the way that we play. The way that he has been unable to, and I'm a big Madge fan, and I'm not saying sack the coach, But the fact is, I've seen a lot of coaches come in to different organisations, and after 12 months or 18 months, they're playing the style of football that the coach is. That is the style of the coach wants them to play. And I don't feel like this group of players is playing magical, and that's where the frustration comes in.
It's an interesting point. It's his teams were synonymous at South for being very much power sides through the middle, physical football. I think he tried to play that here, and maybe he did go soft on that, because I think the back end of the year we seem to be playing a fair amount of expansive football without that resilience. So maybe he's realised he didn't have the players to play the power game in that forward rotation.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. I've got one more for you, Eddie. Ben Cummins is on Eddie Otto's Christmas card list. Buy, swap, or hold?
Ben Cummins. Well, no.
The reason why I say that is because he's our referee this week against Parramatta.
Again?
Yep.
Oh, well, just mark it down as another loss, Joel. I'd like to see our record under Ben Cummins. It always seems to pop up when we're playing South or Parramatta or someone we hate.
Yeah. I will look that stat up and I'll let you know. You can find out that stat. I think we had the worst win record with Henry Perinara. That was the last time I looked, which wouldn't come as any surprise, I wouldn't think. The Eels, obviously, 7:30 Saturday night game. Before we talk about the game, Benji Marshall, Chris Lawrence, obviously their last games for the club. Do you have a favourite Benji moment and a favourite Chris Lawrence moment, Eddie?
Oh, Benji! I mean, there was a lot of great Benji moments, and it was right through my sort of late teens and 20s, going to games, watching him play, and that day at Shark Park, I'll never forget that. Just the freakish try he set up, beating half the side. Probably favourite though was that game against the Dragons, prelim final in 2005, because it was such an electric atmosphere, and him going in untouched after 2 minutes, the roof nearly come off the stadium there. And all the reports during the week were it was going to be all St George fans, because they had a week break on us to get tickets. But that was a tiger roar that night. And then, of course, the next week, the grand final try. And just, coming back. I think coming back has healed some wounds. I know the last couple of weeks have been interesting and he still wants to play on. But coming back, and I think, a credit to himself the way he's performed overall for the past 3 years. Still scoring and setting up plenty of tries. Still got all the ball skills. A lot slower than he was 15 years ago, Joel. But he'll be remembered. They'll be talking about Benji in 20 or 30 years. Young West Tigers fans. He'll be he's at the top of the tree in terms of I don't know if arguably the best player, but certainly the most brand wise and memorable moments wise. And Chris, I don't have one off the top of my head, but just I'm actually looking forward more to seeing off Chris, because I feel like we've been seeing off Benji for a while. He's came and gone, whereas Chris there's been no real fanfare about his career. He's just got on with things. A lot of things have gone against him, injuries and no top 8 finishes for 9 years, but he's never, been anything other than a consummate professional and a really tough, courageous player. His games I watched in them 5-6 years ago, where he looked like he was struggling to play the ball. He almost looked like he was just, the injuries were that bad. But I think, I look at a guy like Mitch Orbison, Joel, and I go almost like he's a rich man's Chris Lawrence for me. Like I don't think he's a much better player than Chris Lawrence, but he's been surrounded by great coaching, stable environment, and great players for 10 years, and he goes out, a legend. Whereas Chris Lawrence goes out not so much that way in the eyes of fans, but I think they're similar sort of abilities. So I really hope they have a dig this week for Chris in particular. You?
Yeah. Chris Lawrence's first game at Suncorp, definitely. I mean, still sticks in your mind, that try, doesn't it? And there's only a few tries that really do stick in your mind, but that does. But I think his try at Leichhardt against the Storm, where he held off Billy Slater, That was
Yeah.
that was a big one. And Benji the same. The Dragons game went from the scrum and he got it and he just sliced them right through. That was fantastic. So they're the best one. Of course, we also got to mention Elijah Taylor. No official confirmation, but it looks like it'll be Elijah's last game. And we all know Elijah's highlight of his time at West Tigers was the big dummy against the Dragons at the SCG.
Yeah. He was trying to give the try up. He was thinking, "What am I doing, making this line break?" But that was a humorous moment. So again, he's like a, obviously not as heartfelt with the Tigers fans, but I don't think you'd hear a bad word about Elijah Taylor. And he's been out of the side more than Josh Reynolds and Russell Packer, but we haven't heard any complaints from him. So
consummate professional. Elijah. Let's put it this way: Elijah would never go home at half time, even if it was in Canberra and it was 2 degrees.
Yeah, fair point.
And we should also mention Harry Grant. Thank Harry for his contribution this year. You never know; he might still be around, but chances are this will be last game.
Yeah, I assume he goes back to Melbourne, and even if he goes on, Joel, to win a comp with Melbourne or something, I think you're always going to remember that he made his NRL. He didn't make his NRL debut with the West Tigers, but he made a name for himself at our club. I think that'll be, fans will pat him on the back, even if he's not in our colours. But yeah, long way to go in his career. So I don't think it's cut and dry that he'll play his career out at Melbourne like Cameron Smith, because it doesn't always work out like that.
No, it doesn't, especially today's game. The game against the Eels, I was glad to see Tommy Talau selected in the setters. Joey dropped, which I think is fair enough. Garner back in the back row. Garner's been in and out, up and down like a yo-yo all year. Elijah Taylor back on the bench. Sean Bloor on the bench, which is great. Nathan Brown will be looking forward to that matchup, no doubt. And Michael Cheekham back as well. Could be maybe a sign. Could be Michael Cheekham's last game for the club, although he is contracted for next year. But look, it's an important game for West Tigers because it would be really, really lovely to knock them out of the top four.
Yeah, and it's a local rivalry game, Joel. And we've sucked against Parramatta, to be honest, the last few years. It's annoying, like we did have that. I remember at the start of the merger, we sort of struggled against Parramatta, and then we had some good years against them. And the last 3 or 4 years, though, wins have been hard to come by. Ordinarily, you'd think this would be an easy win for Para, but there's surely going to be a bit of emotion with Benji and Chris's last game. So, if we can hang with them in the first half, maybe we can get under their skin. They're certainly not playing as well as they were last time we played them. But all things being equal, I'm not confident of a win, but I'd love to see it.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Episode number 90 done and dusted, and last one, as we said earlier in the program, last one with the game. We'll come back next week, or not too much after the game, and record a bit of a wrap up, and probably do that other end of season wrap up as a separate podcast. But although it is not the end, we will continue to do podcasts right throughout the off season, and no doubt, hopefully, have a lot more news in regards to players coming and going and that sort of thing in the next couple of months. I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about, and we'll go back and continue on. I think we only got up to lock forwards. Remember, we were going through all the best players and all the best positions for West Tigers, Eddie. And we've got still got a number of positions that we've got to finish there. But if anybody else has any ideas about things that you'd like us to discuss, send us an email, feedback@westtigerspodcast.com.au.
Always plenty to talk about, Joel. It's never dull at the Tigers, even when this game's not on. So I'm sure we'll have some content to get through.
Why don't we have a discussion about stadiums?
Exactly.
All right. Thanks to you and to all the listeners for listening in through the season 2020 and 2019 as well. And we'll catch you soon. See you, Eddie.
Thanks, Joel. See you, mate.